Now, we tend to live here in a bubble far from the rest of the world, acting like war. What war? Meanwhile, democracies closer to the firing line are getting ready to defend themselves from the new alliance of tyrannies. It's Russia, it's China, it's Iran, and it's North Korea. Now, in Sweden, on Russia's border, its Minister for Civil Defence and its head of the armed forces both warned Swedes to get mentally prepared for war. In Germany, the Defence Minister warned all of Europe to be ready for war too by the end of the decade. In fact, NATO, the defence alliance that includes the US, Canada and most of Europe, will now hold its biggest defence exercise since the Cold War more than 30 years ago. 90,000 troops. Here's the commander of those forces.
The alliance will demonstrate its ability to reinforce the Euro-Atlantic area via transatlantic movement of forces from North America. This reinforcement will occur during a simulated emerging conflict scenario against a near-peer adversary.
Joining me is a man who once had a big say in exercises like this, General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, and I talked to him a short while ago. General Jack Keane, thank you so much for your time. Are these warnings of war exaggerated? Are these preparations, these massive NATO exercises, over the top?
No, not at all in my judgment. These are very real concerns. What has happened when you look at it from the perspective of the United States and also to include our allies and partners, we have lost the capability to deter our adversaries. And we're talking about China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Those four countries, while they all operate in terms of their own national interests as a priority, they are cooperating and collaborating with each other because they have a common interest. And that is to take advantage of the opportunity and vulnerabilities that the United States and the West is offering. They believe that we lack the political will and political resolve. And I think there's some evidence there to support that. So very much so, we are in danger here. If we had to go to war with China today, we are challenged to win that war, Andrew, and we could likely lose it because the Chinese, when we get within 1,000 miles of their coastline, they have a military advantage over the United States and our allies. That's the reality of it. And it's not disputable in my judgment. Also, we haven't been able to deter Russia. Russia is so triumphant as a result of what they believe the United States and Europe are now displaying, a lack of commitment and political resolve to see the war in Ukraine through, that they believe they will eventually have a total victory over Ukraine. And then they have designs on Eastern Europe, particularly the Baltic area. And they are making plans for that and setting the conditions for it. Iran and its proxies are destabilizing the Middle East. There's obviously a war there with potential for it to expand rather significantly. And I go back to my original point. The United States has lost its ability to deter our adversaries.
Now, about this alliance of tyrannies that you mentioned, another front in this growing war with that alliance, that's Israel's war with the Hamas terrorists who are backed by Iran and they control Gaza. Israel on Monday had its deadliest day since the Hamas attack that started this on October 7. 24 soldiers killed. So far, they've only managed to kill an estimated 1/3 of the Hamas soldiers. The promise was to wipe them out before they stopped. How is this war going, and how long can Israel keep it up with the US, an element of what you're suggesting already, getting exhausted with defending Israel, pushing it to stop?
They have been very successful in extinguishing most of the rockets and missile attacks that were so dominating at the beginning of the conflict. And they have taken control largely of northern Gaza. But the reality is that there's much left to be done, obviously, with 2/3 of the fighters still remaining, and the overwhelming majority of their top echelon of leaders are still alive, and obviously in hiding and likely very close to those hostages. When you look at it and project Israel forward, they are going to be challenged to accomplish the military task assigned to the IDF by Prime Minister Netanyahu. That is to destroy Hamas, his entire fighting network and its infrastructure, and certainly remove it as a governing entity. Removing it as a governing entity is not a challenge, but destroying it is going to be a challenge. They can defeat them, and the distinction is that by not destroying them, they leave them enough leaders and enough fighters to be able to rearm and reattack. And they would consider that, Andrew, a victory because they have survived the Israelis' invasion and they have the capability to fight it again another day. And that's what the Israelis have got to be focused on.
Again, it's a story of a waning appetite for the West to prosecute a war against, wars started by these tyrannies, actually. Lastly, and on exactly that point, I don't know, General, if you've been following our government's decision to bury 45 Taipan helicopters that are decommissioned last year rather than give them to Ukraine, which says it wants them to rescue soldiers on the battlefield. Now, our government says, these Taipans are too unsafe to fly. There was a crash last year, even though we don't actually know what caused it. And it says, it's going to cost too much to get these helicopters in the air again. Your view?
Yeah, this is really a regrettable situation. I'm really stunned by it. I mean, Australia would rather just break these helicopters apart and bury them as opposed to give them to the Ukrainians who are fighting a war for their very survival. And we have noted at the Institute for the Study of War a very dramatic difference in the Ukrainians' casualties and how they're processed by comparison to what the United States and our allies did in Afghanistan and in Iraq. They don't have significant medical evacuation where you can get someone off to the battlefield very quickly, stop the bleeding, treat for shock, and then get them to a surgeon's table. That was something we were able to do quite successfully in both of those wars, and they don't have that ability. So here they're asking for it. It would seem to me, at a minimum, what we could have done is just figure out, well, how many of these helicopters can we cannibalize together and ensure they have good parts? Maybe we don't give them 45, but we give them a lesser number of that. And also invite the Ukrainians over to take a look at the whole system and what we're providing them and make sure it's acceptable to them. But I think it absolutely would be, because they have nothing. And they're asking for something here. And I just can't get my head around it, Andrew, that we would rather bury these helicopters than give them to the Ukrainians for the medical evacuation of their wounded soldiers.
Well, General, you wouldn't be the only one that's just absolutely staggered by this decision. I understand at least a dozen helicopters could quite easily be reassembled and given to the Ukrainians, and an Antonov could be even sent to come and pick them up. General Jack Keane, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Great talking to you, Andrew, as always. Thank you.